Why does it feel like you're stuck between two worlds? Too old for TikTok trends, too young to fully understand the world your parents lived in? Why do you feel guilty for wanting work-life balance when previous generations sacrificed everything for their jobs? Why does buying a house feel like a fantasy, even though you were told it would be a natural milestone by 30? If you were born between 1981 and 1996, you're a millennial. And whether you identify with that label or not, your generation has been shaped by forces no other generation has experienced in quite the same way, listing with weight on each item. Economic recession during your formative years, the rise of social media, climate anxiety, student debt, the promise of success that never quite materialized the way you were told it would. And beneath all of that, there are 5 psychological traits almost every millennial carries. Traits that explain why you think, feel, and move through the world the way you do. Instant recognition builder. You know you're a millennial if you remember a time before the internet, but you also can't imagine life without it now. If you were told you could be anything you wanted to be, work hard, and succeed, only to graduate into an economy that didn't have room for you. You know this if you feel tired by the idea of hustling, but guilty when you're not being productive. If you've been called entitled for wanting a living wage, lazy for prioritizing mental health, or unrealistic for expecting job stability. You know this if you're in your 30s or 40s and still feel like you're waiting for your real adult life to start. If you compare yourself to where your parents were at your age and feel like you're failing, even though the economic landscape is completely different. If you've been told you kill industries, napkins, chain restaurants, home ownership, marriage, when really you just can't afford them. If you oscillate between optimism and existential dread about the future, if any of this sounds familiar, you're not alone. Because there are specific psychological patterns that define the millennial experience, and understanding them changes everything. Psychological naming. Millennials are the first generation to come of age during multiple overlapping crises. The 2008 financial crisis, the rise of social media, climate change becoming undeniable, a pandemic that reshaped everything. And each of these events didn't just affect your external circumstances. They fundamentally shaped your internal psychology. Psychologists studying generational patterns have identified that millennials display distinct traits shaped by economic instability, technological disruption, and cultural shifts that no previous generation experienced in quite this combination. You were raised with one set of expectations: get good grades, go to college, get a stable job, buy a house, and build a secure future. But the world you entered didn't honor that contract. And that disconnect created specific psychological adaptations. Not weaknesses, not flaws, adaptations. So let's go deeper into the 5 psychological traits that define the millennial generation. The patterns that shape how you work, love, plan for the future, and navigate a world that keeps changing the rules. Because once you understand these traits, you'll stop blaming yourself for struggling in systems that weren't designed for you. Trait 1. Adaptive pessimism. The first trait is something psychologists call adaptive pessimism, the ability to hope for the best while constantly preparing for the worst. You're optimistic about possibilities, but realistic about probabilities. This isn't cynicism, it's survival. You learned early that nothing is guaranteed. In 2008, people lost their jobs overnight. You witnessed the housing market collapse. You graduated with degrees that didn't lead to the careers you were promised. So you stopped fully trusting stability. You diversify everything: income streams, skills, backup plans. You rent instead of buy, not just because you can't afford to buy, but because commitment feels risky when the ground keeps shifting. You're excited about new opportunities, but always have an exit strategy. This shows up in relationships too. You're open to love, but cautious about vulnerability. You want connection, but protect yourself from depending too much on anyone or anything, because you've learned that security is temporary. Psychologist Jean Twenge, who studies generational differences, writes, "Millennials are more likely than previous generations to expect setbacks and prepare emotionally for disappointment, not because they're pessimistic by nature, but because their formative years taught them that stability is an illusion." This adaptive pessimism is actually a highly functional trait. It makes you resilient, flexible, and mentally prepared for change. But it also makes it hard to fully relax, to trust that good things will last, to invest completely in anything. Trait 2. Chronic decision fatigue. Millennials have more choices than any generation in history, and that abundance of choice is psychologically challenging. Think about it. Your parents had maybe 3 TV channels. You have infinite streaming options. They chose from local job listings. You're competing in a global marketplace. They dated within their social circle. You're navigating endless dating apps. Every single day, you're making hundreds of micro decisions that previous generations never had to consider. Which side hustle should you pursue? Which skills should you learn to stay relevant? Should you invest in crypto, real estate, index funds? Should you post that on social media, or will it hurt your professional brand? This constant decision-making depletes your mental energy. It's why you can spend 45 minutes scrolling Netflix without choosing anything. Why you feel paralyzed by simple choices. Why do you sometimes make no decision just to escape the burden of choosing? Psychologist Barry Schwartz calls this the paradox of choice. More options lead to less satisfaction and more anxiety. And millennials live in the epicenter of that paradox. You're constantly evaluating whether you made the right choice. The right career path, the right city, the right relationship, and the right way to spend your limited time and money. And because you can see everyone else's choices on social media, the comparison is inescapable. This creates a low-level, constant anxiety that you're missing out, falling behind, or choosing wrong. Trait 3. Performative identity. Millennials are the first generation to grow up with their entire lives documented and curated online. You didn't just live your adolescence, you performed it. MySpace, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. You learned early that identity isn't just something you are. It's something you construct, edit, and present for consumption. This has created a unique psychological split. You have your authentic self, the messy, complicated, inconsistent person you are in private. And you have your performative self, the carefully curated version you show to the world. And the gap between those two selves creates mental strain. You know what it's like to feel pressure to have an aesthetic, to brand yourself even if you're not selling anything, to worry about how your life looks to others, not just how it feels to you. This isn't vanity, it's adaptation. Because in the gig economy, in the age of personal branding, your online presence is your resume, your social proof, and your value. But it comes at a cost. You're constantly monitoring yourself, wondering if you're interesting enough, successful enough, happy enough, according to metrics you didn't create but can't escape. And this creates what sociologists call identity work, the constant labor of managing how you're perceived. It's why even your hobbies feel like they need to be Instagram-worthy. Why rest feels like wasted time because it's not content. Why do you feel like you're always performing, even when no one's watching? Trait 4. Delayed milestones and identity confusion. Previous generations had clear markers of adulthood. Graduate, get a job, get married, buy a house, have kids. These milestones happened in a relatively predictable sequence, usually by your late 20s. But for millennials, these milestones have been delayed, disrupted, or completely redefined. You might be 35 and still renting. You might be 38 and unmarried, not because you don't want partnership, but because the traditional path doesn't fit your life. You might be child-free by choice or by circumstance, navigating a world that still treats parenthood as the default. And this creates profound identity confusion, because the markers that used to define successful adulthood are no longer accessible or desirable in the same way. So you're constantly asking yourself, am I behind? Am I doing this wrong? Am I failing at life? Even though objectively, you're navigating a completely different economic and social reality than your parents did. Psychologist Jeffrey Arnett calls this stage emerging adulthood, a prolonged period of exploration and instability between adolescence and full adulthood. For millennials, this stage has stretched longer than any previous generation, not because you're immature or refusing to grow up, but because the structures that used to support those transitions, stable jobs, affordable housing, strong social safety nets, have eroded. So you're improvising adulthood without a clear roadmap, and that takes enormous psychological energy. Trait 5. Values-Driven Exhaustion. Millennials care deeply about meaning, purpose, ethics, and impact. You want your work to matter. You want your purchases to align with your values. You want to support causes, fight injustice, and protect the planet. And this is beautiful. It's necessary. But it's also demanding, because you feel responsible for everything. Every purchase becomes a moral decision. Is this ethically sourced? environmentally sustainable, supporting the right people. Every social issue feels like something you should be educated about, vocal about, and active about. You're expected to be informed, outraged, and mobilized constantly. And if you're not, you feel guilty. You carry the weight of systems you didn't create but feel responsible for fixing. Climate change, systemic inequality, political polarization, economic injustice. And because social media makes every crisis visible and immediate, there's no psychological break from caring. This creates what researchers call moral fatigue, the depletion that comes from trying to live according to your values in a world that structurally resists those values. You want to consume ethically, but ethical options are expensive. You want meaningful work, but you also need to pay rent. You want to fight for justice, but you're also tired from just surviving. So you feel like you're always falling short of the person you want to be, and that internal conflict is draining. So let me ask you a question. Which of these 5 traits resonates most with you? Drop a number in the comments, 1 through 5. Let's see which pattern is most universal. So now, let's talk about why millennials carry these specific traits. This is because you came of age during a perfect storm of economic, technological, and social disruption. You were raised by boomers and Gen X who believed in the American dream. Work hard and you'll be rewarded. Go to college and you'll get a good job. Save money and you'll retire comfortably. But then 2008 happened. You watched parents lose homes, jobs, and retirement savings. You graduated with degrees into an economy with no entry-level jobs. You took unpaid internships just to get experience. You were told you were entitled for expecting livable wages. At the same time, technology exploded. Social media created constant comparison. The gig economy made stability obsolete. Automation threatened entire industries. You had to become endlessly adaptable just to stay relevant. And then there's the cultural shift. You're more educated than any previous generation. But education became financially burdensome, not a ladder. You were promised meritocracy, but inherited inequality instead. All of this created psychological patterns designed for survival in an unstable world. Honest, acknowledging the cost. And these traits come with an emotional cost. Millennials report higher rates of stress and burnout than previous generations at the same age. Not because you're weaker, because you're navigating more complexity with fewer safety nets. You're told to be resilient, but resilience without support is just strain. You're supposed to be adaptable, but constant adaptation without stability is destabilizing. You are told to have a purpose, but without resources, it becomes overwhelming. And here's what's particularly painful. You're blamed for the very adaptations you developed to survive. Called entitled for wanting work-life balance. You were called lazy for prioritizing mental health, and called narcissistic for having boundaries. When really, you're just trying to build a life in a world that keeps moving the goalposts. But here's what's important to understand. These traits aren't weaknesses. They're adaptations to a rapidly changing world. And they come with strengths. Your adaptive pessimism makes you resourceful and prepared. Your awareness of choice makes you intentional, not impulsive. Your performative identity skills make you excellent communicators and storytellers. Your delayed milestones give you time for self-discovery previous generations never had. Your values-driven mindset is changing industries, politics, and culture. You're not broken. You're navigating a world in transition. And that navigation requires psychological flexibility that older generations didn't need to develop. So let's come back to where we started. If you're a millennial, you carry 5 distinct psychological traits. Adaptive pessimism, hope with a backup plan. Chronic decision fatigue, overwhelmed by choice. Performative identity, the mental strain of being watched. Delayed milestones, improvising adulthood without a map. Values-driven exhaustion, caring about everything, all the time. These aren't flaws. They're responses to living through economic recession, technological revolution, and cultural transformation simultaneously. Author Malcolm Harris writes in Kids These Days, "Millennials aren't failing to adapt to adulthood. They're adapting to a version of adulthood that previous generations never had to face." And that's the truth. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're building something new from systems that are evolving. You're not entitled. You're not lazy. You're not killing industries. You're a generation that was promised stability and got chaos instead. And you're surviving it with resilience, creativity, and compassion. That's not weakness. That's strength. If this video helped you understand yourself a little better, you're in the right place. This is UNFELT, where we explore the psychology of what shapes us. Subscribe for more content that validates your experience and helps you understand the patterns beneath it. And tell me in the comments, what generational psychology topic should I cover next? I read every comment. Until next time, take care of yourself. You're doing better than you think.